Hi, Miss Mendiola.
This is Cam.
This is Cam. This is Derek.
This is Derek.
This is our 15-minute podcast about the 3 books we read this semester: Persepolis, Mouse, and Watchmen. We have 5 questions prepared. Each of them we're gonna break down how it relates to every single one of the books and how it kind of ties them all together. And we're starting. We have 5 questions. We'll let you know when we switch.
Yeah, each one, will make the points about the books, and we'll tell you if the points aren't really completely, or questions can't be applicable to the books. But yeah, to start, do you want to read it first?
This is my personal favorite prompt, and this is the use of color throughout the books, whether it's over-exaggerated expressions or not shown at all. And so this is really my favorite topic because, especially in the first 2 books we read this semester, Persepolis and Mouse, it was all black and white. And then specifically with Persepolis, it was very, very traditional, right? It was all black and white, very traditional boxing and framing, not a lot of graphic weight anywhere, and just very simple drawn characters.
I think sorry to interrupt you, but I think it did a really good job kind of like rationalizing and making sense to the reader of how everything in the book was supposed to be about the order and the regime that that was going on at that time in Iran, and that was a big thing, the big kind of the main just prompt of the book. And I think we saw that even in the way that we were reading and what we were reading, and that made such a huge difference for every part of the reader's perspective on the book. So I do agree with you, and I like that. Yeah.
And building off of that as well, I really liked how in a lot of it they used black and white to represent kind of tones. Like, for instance, my favorite frame in the book, I don't have my book on me, unfortunately, but it was a bunch of prisoners, and they were all sitting there, and they were blindfolded. And what I really liked about it is that instead of having a traditional white background, like all the other backgrounds in the book, they added the black backgrounds to kind of add that fear aspect and that just dark tone, so we get a feel for the people or the characters inside the book. And I really appreciated how Persepolis kind of used that throughout the book.
I thought Persepolis was a pretty generally easy book to read. But yeah, I liked it. But so moving on, I mean, we see in the other 2 books, Mouse is an interesting book because we don't see a lot of color and a lot of vast color differences.
Yeah, it's all black and white again.
And so those are pretty different from otherwise the same book as the other book we read in this semester of Watchmen. And so I think I'll take the point on Watchmen, and we can go back to Mouse really quick. But I think Watchmen is really colorful. I thought that still the overall color tone was on the darker side, and I think a big part of that was still that the book was a little heavy. I mean, there were some pretty serious points.
Gore aspects.
Exactly. It was pretty gory book, and so I think generally the tone of the book in every single thing was very gloomy. It almost the doomsday clock was consistently counting down. So there was just this constant fear of darkness and the inevitable just darkness taking over the people, and that there's that fear, right? And so that's why we see that darkness, I think.
And I agree with that as well. I like how they used the color to really represent emotion in a lot of it, right? In a lot of the scenes where we see Rorschach with his mask off, right? You see the entire frame is just bright red, right? You see he's obviously mad that someone took his mask off. He's in fear, right? He doesn't know what to do, and that's really something that carried on throughout the book. Whether they used yellow, blue, purple, pink, green, whatever it was, they really used color to capture emotion very well.
And really quickly going back to Mouse, I think Mouse is such an interesting book because there were so many crazy, there was such a vast majority of the story that was just very it was moving so quickly, and there's so much happening, and the reader really has to do a lot of work to keep up. And I think that was what made Mouse so interesting, but I think as well what made it not over exaggerated, what made Mouse an interesting book and not too bleak but not too over the top for the reader, was the fact that the color played a big part into it, and that there wasn't such a wide range of color.
They didn't try to over
exaggerate.
They didn't try to really push the ideas they had on the book. They kind of tried to give it like a reader's feel to try and make the reader guide the way for the book.
Exactly, and I think that was what made it so surprising to the reader, and especially to me. I was really surprised at the end when we saw there being a little stint of color just at the end, showing kind of like the end of the book, and I thought
Yeah.
that was what made it interesting. But really quickly, going back to the point where when Rorschach gets his mask taken off, this is just a great way to lead into the first question we have, which is how generational trauma has been reflected through the three books. And I think a thing that we see here is that he's so insecure about partially getting his mask taken off, but also his true identity
His
being
true
revealed.
identity himself.
And I think it's not just his true identity that he has to protect for safety matters, but I think it's and not trying to get murdered, but I think it's also the fact that he's
the trauma,
Yeah.
like the past experiences that have built up. And right, obviously, right, he had a lot of issues with his mother, right? She was a prostitute.
Yeah, and I
And
think
it really affected him as a person throughout the book, right? We see that's the reason why he turned into this like crazy, all for like it has to be the right way, violence, right? And it makes sense as to why his character ended up like that. And we see like how it passed through from his mother and how that like kind of led into his origin story.
I wish I had my character chart written out actually,
Yeah.
because there's so much I wrote down on there that would tell me
Yeah.
exactly I knew about Rorschach, but like he really does. He doesn't stray away from what he believes very often or really at all. And we see like from just such a young age, because of what he was going through at home, we see that generational trauma carries over from his mom being like that, and then now to him being very like abusive, or not abusive, but very violent. Just very angry in general. We kind of see this kind of like being a really big sense of generational trauma that he's experiencing, that he likely will pass down to the next person. That if he,
he's
yeah,
dead.
I mean,
but like
if,
like,
if
he could,
if
it
he
could have hypothetically been passed down. But
and yeah, you go with the next one.
I was just gonna transition into the second one, but obviously the easiest kind of way to find this theme of generational trauma throughout the books is in Mouse, right? Like we see Vladik, he was in the concentration camps, he was in Auschwitz, right? Like he was in no real, like he didn't have an ideal situation to say the least, right?
Yeah.
And it led him to just turn into this like very dark and like shaded individual who's just very keep fixing the camera, sorry.
My bad.
No, but he's just very like focused on survival, right? And just like these little things like returning the half-eaten cereal box, right? And just like you can just see how it's gone on to Artie and how it's just passed throughout the book.
And even past that, how he wants he wants almost the opposite while also wanting the same thing that he experienced at the same time. He's constantly worried about Artie, right? And he makes he's like, you have to eat that. He's constantly worried about like Artie has to make sure he gets enough food. Artie has to like experience the opposite of what I experienced, but also be ready, right? So we see kind of throughout the book we see Vladik kind of changing his perspective when he has to almost prepare Artie to get ready for the Holocaust, for him to be affected by the Holocaust. So we see like this huge shift, but at the same time we can see how the generational trauma really is like
it impacts
clear.
The book very clearly. Yes.
And then like we said in the beginning, we would let you know if we had a hard time finding the questions applicable to one of the books, and throughout Persepolis, we really had a hard time kind of finding some
generational trauma.
Yeah,
and
some
just
clear
clear generational trauma. And I mean, like the best kind of ideas we could come up with is like Marjane's like parents and her whole family was kind of raised under the Shah of Iran, and so that was just kind of like the only thing we could really find as to how it related to the book. But in terms of generational trauma, there isn't much that's reflected on Persepolis. However, we see throughout the book how she goes through all of her war experiences and how she had to deal with war, much like Vladik did in Mouse. And so the reason why we kind of like added this portion in, even though we didn't have a real point for Persepolis, is that we think that Marjane's story and how she was raised could very easily lead to generational trauma in her future if she has kids, right? And we just think it was a very easy parallel to find between Mouse and Persepolis.
We're saying that like because of what Vladik went through before the starvation, everything he had to go through, that would be something that would spark generational trauma, and for Marjane to go through that, that means
or similar things, right?
Yeah,
with everything that was going on in Iran.
That would be something that would spark it, and
yeah,
her parents hadn't really they were just raising her, but we didn't really see that like her parents had were leading her one way or the other. It wasn't really like super fixated on one thing, so that's kind of one thing we found. But like speaking on the topic of generational trauma in Persepolis, I think a way that's the way that she doesn't assimilate to the way her parents are, and she's kind of like she's very like she's
very separated, and she's not like tied to this,
and she's
the
rebellious,
culture, and she's rebellious too,
and
what she's supposed to do,
and loud, and those are all good things, especially because at a time where the regime is trying to silence people like that, and they're trying to take control of people and make them make their voices smaller. I think this leads us into really our fifth question out of our fifth question, and the question is how is moral compromise a means to survive? And I think you can go on Persepolis.
For Persepolis, a lot of what we came up with for this one is a lot different than the other two books, right? The other two books, it's a lot about her physically surviving, or the characters physically surviving, right? Vladik going through the Holocaust, and we have our example for Watchmen. We'll bring it up later. But for Persepolis, our idea is kind of how her personality survived, right? Like going through all of this trauma, moving all over the place at such a young age, getting cheated on, right? All of this, and right, it just despite all of these hardships coming to her, she remains the same person, and just kept showing how she stood up for what she thought was right throughout the entire book.
And that's a means to survive in the way that's her personality that she's fighting for. She's fighting for her personality to survive.
Yeah,
not
that's
really,
what I was trying to get at. Yeah,
her personal well-being, not her physical well-being, but more her personal well-being, and that's what's important. And we see that really just like Derek said, Marjane, she goes and she's buying illegally imported music,
the short haircut, all that stuff.
And then we also see that Anush, her uncle, is exiled and then imprisoned, for speaking up for what he believes and for what he thinks is right. So I think that's really where we see Persepolis kind of as a means to survive. I mean, I think that that also her parents sending her away to
Austria.
Austria. That's a really big part of her physical well-being to survive. But I think that's really where we saw a lot of it. Yeah. And then I think so. Moving on,
in terms of Mouse, moral compromise as means to survive, right? We see it very commonly with Vladik, right? Just in the concentration camps in general, right? For instance, when he was helping, when he was speaking Polish in the concentration camps, right? Speaking English and Polish, or German and Polish, right? And to communicate with people, right? He was compromising to survive, right? He did everything he did throughout the book to get to the next page, right?
And that's morally how he thought was right, and how he was going to get to live on, to see his family and see everyone once again.
And of course, right, in the camp, right, he didn't want to help the people who, right, were running the camp, but he saw it as a way to stay alive. And, in desperate times come for desperate measures, he stayed alive, right? That's a way to survive. And,
And, when he came down with, or everyone else is being, is getting sick and everything, he saw, and he had to go pee on the bodies, right? Morally, that would be something that would just be so hard to do, but ethically to survive, he just had to,
and he was willing to give up that moral emphasis just to let it happen.
And throughout Watchmen, I think just a really easy like trend that we
Yeah.
see is Vite, just the guy who writes the pirate comics.
Invite. Yeah.
Yeah, he used the floating, and like he used
When
like
he was lost at sea and
he's
there
using
was
the dead
the dead
bodies
bodies that
to
were all
stay
floating,
afloat.
right? And you use them to stay afloat, right? That's not a very huge example that happened in the book, right? But it's moral compromise to survive, right? That's how he was able to survive, and right, no one wants to float on dead bodies,
Yeah.
but like,
But
yeah,
that's what it took, and that was a really moral compromise. And I think that we really see the effects of floating on the dead bodies, though. When he gets back ashore, he's just so like
he's so
driven
distressed,
and
yeah.
out of his mind that
Yeah.
he just goes and he just unfortunately he does kill those two
Well,
people.
That does happen when
Right.
you're lost at sea, but like,
Yeah, but,
it for the point doesn't matter. But
like moving on. So here's a question that this is our third question. It's a loss of innocence throughout characters in the three books. So let's just start with Persepolis. That one's pretty clear that Marjane just kind of she loses her innocence because she's just exposed
going
to
through
everything,
all this stuff, right?
especially in Austria.
Yeah,
Austria, like she's
right.
just exposed
Yeah.
to a whole new world, and she hangs out with a certain crowd that does
Right,
things
yeah.
that she's not used to.
She gets cheated on. She's
Yeah.
moving all over the place. She's
She's just exposed to things that her parents otherwise
she's
probably
worrying
would have
about
kept
her
from.
She's worrying about her family a lot of the time, right? Because her family's still all in Iraq, and there's still conflicts there. So it's just
She's exposed to a
Yeah.
lot really young, and I think a big thing is that she also like this trend of like losing innocence kind of like it leads over because of these rebellious like or it bleeds over because of these it bleeds over because of these rebellious like tendencies, and that's one that Marjane really has, is that she has such a rebellious kind of like tendency or personality that she's constantly doing things that expose her to new things, right? Like going and buying illegal CDs, right? She'd never been exposed to those ladies then like who were dressed in the shawls and everything, right? And who were like basically like insulting her for who she is, right? She's never been exposed to that, so that was a new experience that kind of like cut down a lot of her innocence. And I think even throughout like Mouse, I mean, we see that innocence
Mouse,
is lost.
it's again very obvious in Mouse. So I feel like out of the three books, I'd say Mouse is very easily breakdownable, just because of it happens on a true event. Kind of everyone knows about the true event, but right in the Holocaust, obviously, like that's obvious loss of innocence. And I mean, for instance, that's for Vladik, but for instance, Artie, having to hear your father talk about like all these horrific things he went through, right? It's just like not something pleasant, and just the loss of innocence, hearing about all these gruesome, terrible things happening.
Yeah, I completely agree, and like even like a loss of innocence throughout Watchmen, like we just see there's so much like I mean. Rorschach is easily the easiest one. He's just exposed to so much. Sorry, he's just exposed to so much so early, and I think that's just such a big big topic. Sorry about that, but that's just such a big topic. And then I think also like we see like Laurie's exposed to a new kind of sustainable love, right? Like with Dan, she's exposed to a love that sticks around,
sustainable.
And that's
not going to leave her,
right? And that that can be there for her. I think that's a big that's a new one.
I wouldn't say that's really.
Sorry.
I wouldn't say that's really loss of innocence, though. I would say that's more like kind of just like grasping it again, right? Being able to get back into that comfort of being human again without having to worry about all these things. But it obviously shows her loss of innocence earlier throughout the book, right? Or earlier throughout her story in general. And
so I think let's just get skipping right to the last question. You can read.
I'll ask it. But our last question is, how do you see the past trials and tribulation of characters that survive the entire story reflect and affect their final deception and presentation? So I'll go first, or I'll do my example, which was Persepolis. One thing that really passed throughout the book for me was the idea of the veil. And right, the veil was kind of throughout the book. Marjane keeps the same ideals about it. Right, the beginning of the book, she dislikes it. She goes and she's free out in Austria, and when she is right, she's not wearing it. She's very happy, blah blah blah, and then she has to come back, and it's straight to wearing it, and it kind of represents just this like or not this foreshadowing, but just this weight that kind of is held over the characters, and I think that the fact that Marjane is able to kind of get away from that weight towards the end of the book by moving to France, right? Getting away from that and showing how her past tribulation of right having to wear this veil and having her just like morality kind of dumbed down and her personality dumbed down
Yeah, I like
to
that.
being able to just like flourish into
I completely
like
see what you mean.
what she
Yeah.
is, and I really just liked how they used the veil to represent that.
I didn't really see that before, but I completely see what you're talking about now. That makes a lot of sense, and I think kind of like leading into the next point is that we really do see. I think I'll take Watchmen because that's this is one of my favorite questions actually that we drafted, and I think it's really probably my favorite because
Mhm.
I like Watchmen because it's a hard question to answer because there's so many characters and that's what made the book really challenging. But at the same time, I really like how we see Dan's his past trials and tribulations with Lori, and just moments later he's in this dream being kind of like his true identity where he's actually like poised and strong. He's not presented as overweight, and he's masculine, not so nervous and anxious. And this old villain that he was I forget her name, but I'm sorry, but it's this old villain that he used to like basically like attempt to chase. And I think
He
that
breaks into his house.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that it's just so interesting to see. Her name was Kitty something, I think.
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting to see that that's who's kind of pulling this veil of like Derek said, the veil of like who he truly is and who he truly is like presented to be and who he really can be, right? This heroic like confident person, and I like that that's kind of how it's shown. And I think finally like our last point, which
Just
is
Mouse.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think like the past trials and tribulations we just see like at the end that sickness that kind of takes over all the characters. And I think it's just our like Artie is just kind of like there, right? And I think but the sickness that takes over is just so present because it's hard to go through something that's serious, and it's hard to survive a place where everyone else is sick physically, but mentally I think there was just such a high tendency of like people breaking down eventually because
Yeah.
a mind
Mentally breaking down, physically
no one should have to
breaking
go
down.
through that
Yeah.
much, right? I think like we just see
And
that.
in that way, I kind of look at it as like kind of like ass backwards in terms of the other two that we did at Persepolis and Watchmen, right? Those we kind of see how right this hypothetical veil is kind of, or this hypothetical weight is kind of being lifted off their shoulders, right? Marjane's veil is gone, right? Like, and so like in this we kind of see how they're right, they start off as just regular people and then they have to go through this, and right, they just kind of never go back to how they were, and it kind of just shows the depletion of their like personalities, and how like this event really just like changed how a lot of people in terms of like specifically like hypothetically like how the like how it affected people in like the Jewish community and how it led on to how they like acted in the future.
Yeah, I completely see what you mean. And like I think yeah, that's pretty much everything we have, but overall I think there's just so many different themes throughout these three books,
Yeah.
and I think we tried to get at a wide variety of them, and I hope we
Yeah.
did a good job. But it was just, I mean, there's so much more to talk about, and if you ever want to talk
Yeah.
to us in class, we'd be happy. Well, the
Well, we
class we have
can't
left.
talk in class.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
the
okay, on
classes we have
Monday.
left, yeah,
shit.
the class we have
But-
left, we love to talk about it
Yeah.
more. But yeah, I think this is actually a really good
Yeah.
project to take up, and I think that we had a really good time kind of drafting the prompts we have and the questions we have, and then also just
making the podcast in general. It's been really fun.
And and figuring out each moving piece to each question.
Just to close it out, I'll finish it off with a question. Cam, what was your favorite book we read this semester?
Honestly, I think,
and why?
I wouldn't say. I think honestly, Watchmen was the most interesting one I had, and really what changed it for me was that one chapter. I think. It was chapter 7 that I had where you see Lori smoking a cigarette after she said she stopped, and I realized then that or said that she was gonna quit, and that she needs to kick the habit, and she was like, it's a bad habit. I think that kind of changed around. I was like, man, this book isn't so shallow. This book isn't so it's a little hard to follow, but I really did like the overall tone of the book, and that's what I liked about it so much, was that there was such a deep understanding that it was needed, even through all the really big and fast paced kind of topics.
I would agree with that personally. I liked Watchmen a lot, and a lot of it came from me watching the movie actually. Right, when I read it for the first time, it was pretty hard to understand in general, but after watching the movie, it kind of helped me piece the book together a little bit more. And after being able to piece it together, and then just scrolling through the book and just looking at the pictures, but kind of understanding what's happening and not having to read it over again, it kind of like Cam said, it helped me realize it's not as shallow at all, right? It really just it's a serious good book. But I also really liked how they used color in it, right? And when for instance, when I signed up for this class, it's a graphic novels class, I was expecting, comic books, blah, blah, blah. And we went in and it was black and white. And I was like, oh, this isn't what I signed up for.
New,
yeah, right? But then Watchmen, right? It's kind of what I was expecting from the class. And I was kind of thrilled to see it because, right, it was a book about superheroes, colorful, New York City, right? And it made me excited. And just reflecting on it after reading it, I enjoy it even more now.
Yeah. I think, we're just super happy to be able to
all right.
do this.
Well, thank you, Miss Mendiola. It's been a good semester.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.